Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give, and there's no regular commitment. Just hit the link in the show description to support now.
Selling a little or a lot? Shopify helps you do your thing however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit a million orders stage. Shopify is there to help you grow. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout. 36% better on average compared to other leading commerce platforms. Because businesses that grow, grow with Shopify. Get a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/work. Shopify.com/work.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous two-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
It took a lifetime to find the person you want to marry. Finding the perfect engagement ring is a lot easier. At BlueNile.com, you can find or design the ring you've always dreamed of with help from Blue Nile's jewelry experts who are on hand 24/7 to answer questions, and the ease and convenience of shopping online. For a limited time, get $50 off your purchase of $500 or more with code LISTEN at BlueNile.com. That's $50 off with code LISTEN at BlueNile.com.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name's John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and film critic, and today I'm going to be talking to Jay Glennie. Jay is a writer of a series of making of books. His latest is a detailed account of the making of Danny Boyle's 1996 adaptation of Irvine Welsh's Trainspotting. It's a brilliant, a beautiful book to look at, beautiful coffee table book, although that phrase doesn't really sum up the amount of erudition that goes and involvement that goes into making such a thing. He has talked to everybody involved in the making of the film, including, of course, the major stars, the directors, Irvine Welsh, but also he manages to find people who have stories who are perhaps never been spoken to before. It's a really interesting, detailed account, and absolute must for any fans of the book. If you enjoy the podcast, please remember to like, subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter at Dr. John T. DRJONTY. But before you do any of that, please enjoy the conversation. Trainspotting. When was the first time you saw it, Jay? When was your first experience of it?
It would have been in our local flea pit here in Chelmsford, Essex. I live in the countryside, but I'd have driven into the town and seen it in our little flea pit. Yeah, it just knocked me. Yeah, it really did knock me. I actually, like a lot of young guys during that period, had read about the guys in all the magazines, the faces of such like and Blitz, even before Shallow Grave came out. And that's what really struck me. These guys were, suddenly being talked about as the saviors of the British film industry. And that really, who are they? They're being written about in really lofty terms in these magazines. Fast forward to interviewing Andrew McDonald, it transpired that the guy who had the flat underneath him was a writer for one of these magazines. He said, "If you've got a film off the ground, I'll write about you." And suddenly these three guys, Danny, John and Andrew, were being spoken of as the saviors of the British film industry. And then Shallow Grave came out, and it was such a great film. Suddenly we could enjoy a film like young Americans could, the Blue Velvets. And then I heard that they were doing Trainspotting, and like many impressionable young guys, I went out and got the book. took me an age to get into the vernacular. It really did. But it didn't stop me walking around with it underneath my arm, trying to look cool.
Well, that paperback with the Halloween masks was a must-have. It was even if you weren't reading it necessarily, it had to be on your shelf.
Yeah. And one of them, one of the guys masked up his herb.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I remember seeing it. I think I saw it at university. I think it was at university, and I think it was at the Guild. And I remember it had an immediate effect on me and I think it had a similar effect on many young guys, of going straight to the barber and having my head shaved to a number 4.
Yeah, but none of us looked quite as cool as you in doing it, did we?
Not a single one. Not a single one. Because I remember that was the case as well with football. I mean, I remember all the football teams, that buzz, that suede head sort of, it's not skinhead quite. It's a sort of suede head sort of look.
Yeah.
Became suddenly de rigueur. It was what everybody had.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? You tend to dive in, and Ewan at that particular time was everywhere, wasn't he? And Danny told me that that there was a lot of friction, but there was John Hodge. He was sort of really, he's going to be our Renton. He was this gorgeous guy with his flowing locks. His agent was setting him up to be the next Darcy. And all of a sudden, he's lost most of his body fat and shaved his hair off, and was going to play this drug addict in this controversial adaptation. But Danny knew, and Andrew knew in particular, that they wanted a star. They wanted a heightened reality. They told me of Irvin's book. The last thing they wanted was a Christine F. style version of it. And Danny said, 4 or 5 movies could have been made of Irvin's book, but their version of it was going to be a heightened reality. And they wanted to also show that there is a point when drugs, drink, there is an attraction. Without showing that attraction, why would you bother doing it? So they had to show that attraction, and then they wanted to show the downfall. And I think to have that attraction, you really needed somebody like Ewan McGregor to play that role, because you had to be attracted to him. I mean, the heartbeat of the film arguably is Ewan Bremner, but the fulcrum, everything went round Ewan. And he actually told me, which backed up what Danny said, that he came to Danny and said, look, I'm not doing anything. Everybody's got their moment in the sunshine, and I'm not doing anything. It all seems to be happening around me. And he said, Ewan, you've got the voiceover. You're our Alfie. And he said that sort of placated him. And then when he came to do the voiceover at the end of the film, he'd come down to London, he could see, okay, now the bigger picture is, and sure enough, I mean, he's not only his career, all of theirs careers, but it was the right decision putting Ewan as the lead. You couldn't imagine anybody else now, could you?
I think that's the role of his career, isn't it? I'm trying to think if there's another sort of real knockout role that he's made that really dominates the film so much as well. Even though it is a sort of ensemble piece.
It's strange, isn't it? Because a lot of his films have been as sort of co-stars. Moulin Rouge with Nicole Kidman, arguably was Nicole the star. I don't know him at all, but I got to know him a little bit during this, and he comes across just like he does on his bike shows. This really sort of humble guy, and pretty laid back, and really, really humble, and under no illusions what the film gave him. What Trainspotting gave him. Just a really, really nice guy, as they all are. It was really weird. It's Trainspotting. When you look at the cast and the crew, everybody has had a career off the back of this film. It's just hard to fathom, isn't it, that happens. It's not always happened. Oh, what happened to her? What happened to him? Virtually every one of them went, ooh. Kevin McKidd, he said it wasn't my time to pop. He had friends telling him to go to America. Come on, Kevin, get over there. He said, but I was a young boy from the Highlands. I'd been eaten alive, absolutely eaten alive. Took me 16 years. He got Rome, and his agent said, "Look, I'm going to put you up for a couple of shows." There was 2 guys up for the role in his his TV show, the Grey's Anatomy. Right. And the other guy was the
Van der Beek.
Van der Beek, yeah. What was the TV show he was in? Dawson's Creek.
Right. Yeah.
So it was him and Kevin up for the role in Grey's Anatomy. And Kevin got it.
Right.
Yeah, it was over the Thanksgiving weekend. His agent said they're gonna let us know after the Thanksgiving weekend. So he literally sat there biting his nails down to the quick, and he got the role. And I think he's played that role now for 11 years, and he's a huge star in America.
Yeah.
He's took about 16 years to pop, but when it popped, it really popped.
And Kelly MacDonald as well. I mean, Kelly MacDonald had a huge career, No Country for Old Men, and then Boardwalk Empire, and her casting, as you say in your book, was a real sort of fortuitous piece of casting, because she was absolutely coming from nowhere and fell over when she entered the audition room as well.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? You think it's going to be one of those mythical stories, because I'd heard a little bits about it over the course of the last few years, but it is absolutely true. Saul Metzstein, the young runner, now a director in his own right, but a young runner on the film, was tasked with finding the next Patricia Arquette and roaming the Edinburgh for a weekend, and then roaming Glasgow for a weekend, looking for this young Patricia Arquette or Kate Moss, handing out leaflets and getting abused by these young girls he was approaching, as we allude to in the book. And he was on that top table with Gal Stevens, Danny, and Andrew, and he said he remembers when she walked in, he looked at Danny, and Danny, whoa. And when I said that to Danny, he said, yeah, as soon as she walked in, she just stood out. He said, because the others did look a little bit like Kate Moss and Patricia Arquette, and she didn't. Right. Kelly told me her friend had cut her hair a couple of weeks prior, so she'd cut all these long locks off. She had holey jeans on, a scruffy jumper, and here she was now auditioning for a film that she thought, I've got no right to even go for. She couldn't afford to buy the book, so she read it incrementally in the local bookshop. And it was either a loaf of bread, or do I put the money into the machine to get the photos for her CV?
That's crazy. So let's just rewind a little bit to the book, because I mean, as you say, it's not a book that you read and you instantly see a film.
No, I think that's the genius of being young. And a little frisson of danger that Andrew said. He was passed a book by a girlfriend of his, and read it on the plane back to Scotland for the Christmas period. And he opened it up and started reading it. He thought, oh, hang on a minute, this could be our next film. Came back, give it to Danny Boyle and John Hodge. He said, guys, read this. And John Hodge was already writing A Life Less Ordinary, which was set to be a follow-up to Shallow Grave. And Danny was editing Shallow Grave. They took the book away and started reading it, and both of them fell in love with it. But both of them said, bloody hell, how the hell can these sort of singular vignettes being turned into a film? And out of all these stories, who's the star? Where's the story? And John said, okay, give me a few weeks. And he just found Renton. He thought Renton could be the star. And then we put, Spud couldn't really, Begbie couldn't at that particular time, Sick Boy. You wanted somebody you could actually root for. And he chose Renton. And then say, for anybody who's read her work, he's a genius. He's a genius. But how the hell they thought there was going to be a movie? Now it looks pretty obvious, doesn't it? But at the time, nothing of the sort. But Shallow Grave, they were pre-selling Shallow Grave, and it was going through the roof. All the territories were getting bought. And Film 4 said, yeah, and Polygram said, okay, what's next? How'd you fancy this film about some John eggs? And it was shot for just about £1 million. So the risk was negligible, but even so, it was a risk. But boy, did it pay off.
I love how you write about that pre-development as well, that the everything, the pre-production, and how they're putting the script together, and how there's a certain point. I think there's a really interesting moment in the book where you talk about how the idea that they have to begin with someone running, and that's moved from the middle of the script to the beginning. As a viewer, you think, well, how could it be any other way? That's such a good opening.
Yeah, and that just came about when going down to view the Highlands and the station, that famous station, and on the way back just chatting, and they realised, oh, hang on a minute, put Lust for Life in there, and you've got one of the greatest openings ever, haven't you? You really have. All shot on the fly, all pushing out spectators watching, pushing them out of the way, and shooting down the Edinburgh High Street there. It's just iconic. Iconic's
the right word, and it's totally. And you've got that wonderful freeze frame of Renton and Ewan McGregor sort of landing on the bonnet of the car, and then that's almost reminded me a bit of Scorsese, bringing it back to one of your other heroes.
Yeah, and it was for them. They screened Goodfellas together, and then screened it for the cast just to get them. That's the kind of vibe that they wanted to foster, and all of them to a person. And I couldn't find them because Danny couldn't find them. Danny had lent them to somebody, but he found me some pages of the mood books that he put together, and they had pictures of Montgomery Clift in there. They had pictures of George Best. They had just colours and just designs in there just to get each actor into the mood. And everyone alluded to these mood books. So if anybody out there's listening who's got them, they're the holy grail of the Trainspotting story. Cave Quinn, who designed all the sets, she built the sets in these little cardboard sets she built, hand built, and they all just got thrown away because at the time, you're young. It's 1996. Was the film going to go as big as would some Wally like me be writing about it 25 odd years later? And so you don't know what you've got, do you? So there were some things there that you didn't find, but that was to me, what the other thing that came across when I was writing it was Danny said at our first conversation, you had to be a believer. And so I put that sort of thing in there, that every time someone's cast, they're now a believer. Because Danny said that was so key when you're making a movie, almost like a guerrilla movie, you're bringing all these components together. You've only got a short window to film in. You need to be surrounded by believers. And every one of the cast and crew were believers. And that really comes across as a viewer, doesn't it? You're along for the ride with them. And that's what I wanted to try and create with the book. There's some stuff that I edited out because I wanted it to be a short, sharp. I think it's about 75,000 words, so it's not mega short. But likewise, I hope there isn't a lot of padding in there. I wanted it to be short, sharp, like the film.
Yeah, exactly. It's punchy, and there's a narrative drive, and you're running with them. You're it's that same sort of energy that you have. Because I mean, ultimately, when it comes down to it, I watched it again a few years ago. I mean, I've watched it about. Must have watched it 10, 15 times at least. And I remember watching it after a significant gap and sort of thinking, no longer being the kid at university going and getting my head shaved, who's more or less the same age as the guys in the movie, but instead being like someone encroaching on middle age, and sort of seeing it more as this is a youth film. This is one of those. You could go back to sort of 1950s or Teddy Boys, an early Oliver Reed film or something like that, and see a similar kind of the youth in danger, and that it's kind of in that tradition. I think the difference would be that it's seen much more from the perspective of the young people than society, as a whole.
Yeah, it could have easily been Renton's parents. We could have had a lot about the suffering they had endured, but it wasn't. We were never really taken out of that, as you say, that youthfulness. And once again, the guys, all three of them, that it was quite weird actually, because you're interviewing on numerous occasions the three voices that created Trainspotting. And it's very rare you say that, isn't it? Danny Boyle is Danny Boyle. He's almost a brand, isn't it, Danny Boyle? But they were very much the threesome, and all three of them believed that this wasn't a film about drugs. This was a film about youth, as you alluded to, John. It literally was a film about young people. And the drugs were just a side product of them being a gang.
And in fact, the most dangerous character of the sort of 4 or 5 principal characters is kind of the oldest one. Is Begsby, who's this, he's kind of is your older brother's age, if you like.
Yeah, which was really this dichotomy, wasn't it? Why on earth? And I asked Robert this as well. Why on earth was he hanging around them? He had nothing in common with them. You could get Tommy. He wasn't into drugs initially, because they were all the same age. But what on earth was Begbie's attraction? And Robert said, did he fancy him? Was he a homosexual? Was he a repressed homosexual? And he said, and all these clues, and that's what as an actor, you're picking up all these little clues, either in the text or as you get the costume together. And I thought that was really interesting as well, because Begbie is such an iconic figure, and the clothes are so iconic. But when he originally turned up, he had a full beard. He had army greens on. God almighty, there by the grace of God. There wouldn't have been the Begbie that you and I know, and we all know and almost love, rather bizarrely. But having grown up, around that era, and the football, horrible hooliganism. I mean, I used to go to West Ham a lot, and in retrospect, you can't believe your parents let you go as a young boy, because it was so violent, so horrible. It's never family sport. It really wasn't. It was horrible environment, and that's what Robert picked up. These football casuals, these very expensive clothes, and they labelled these expensive clothes to advertise just how expensive they were, and then go and get them ripped to pieces by having a fight. And that was Begbie, wasn't it? It really was. All the others are sort of almost, in scruffy clothes that you'd perhaps think that a drug addict would wear, and there was Begbie rising above it all with his pastel colour Pringle jumpers on. Remarkable.
I mean, he reminds me a little bit of, it's a totally different character, but almost Gary Oldman from The Firm, from that Alan Clark film.
Great film. Yeah.
That same sort of very, intelligent, but also sociopathic.
Yeah.
Charming, as you say. There's an element of charm, there's an element of, but that violence can come out of nowhere at any point.
Yeah. And Gal Stevens is one of the sort of unsung heroes of the Tower, really, the casting agent, and she'd seen Roberts in the Cracker episode. I don't know if you recall that. It's
Robbie Coltrane series.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and you can see some of Roberts' scenes if you don't go and buy the DVD of Cracker if it's available. You can certainly find it on YouTube. And I remember watching it at the time. I truly do. And he plays a skinhead, if you like, for want of a better description, and he's absolutely psycho. He's a horrible person. And Gal had seen that, and she thought, I need to start casting him. And as anybody who would know who's read Irvin's book, Begbie is this huge character. He's Gandalf. He's bloody huge.
Mm-hmm.
And as we allude to in the book, I don't want to spoil too much of it, but Robert had been auditioning for Shallow Grave, and things didn't happen for him there for one reason or another, which will be revealed in the book. And then he's offered the opportunity to come and audition for Trainspotting. And I think, okay, what's this about? So he goes down, has a chat with Danny, and Danny says, "What role do you want to play?" And he said, "Before my ass had even hit the seat, I was being offered this gig." And he hadn't done the full Monty at that stage. He wasn't a huge star, and there he was getting offered a film off the bat. Well, I don't know, about Sick Boy. No. What about Begbie? Begbie's huge. No. Danny said, "Small psychos are the best." And you mean absolutely just stunning. And Danny said he saw the sort of the quizzical look on Robert's face and said, "Give it a week, go away, have a think about it." He said, "The more I thought about it, I thought, you're right. When you're in a bar, aren't you? John, you've been there, and you see the small ones, and they're just sizing somebody up to kick off, and it's so true.
They got something to prove.
Yeah, they are, aren't they? And boy, did he capture that in that character, didn't he? When he came back and said, "Yeah, okay, I'll do the role," and oh man, one of the defining characters. He's sort of Don Logan, isn't he? Out of Sexy Beast. He's just, you don't know where he's going, what's going to happen. And as a viewer, even now, and you know the film so well, you still, oh my God, when that poor man brushes into him in the bar, doesn't he? Watch where you're going. If you can't handle your drink, you just know what's coming.
It's the Joe Pesci danger element that you just think, this guy is utterly dangerous. Is utterly, you haven't got a clue what's going to happen next, but it's not good. It's probably not going to be good.
Yes, yeah, and both. It sounds like I'm clanging away here. Interviewed both of them, and they're both really, really lovely guys, and both. If you were outcasting the film, in these two, you couldn't get either of them. You'd say, "I'd want a Joe Pesci, Robert Carlyle type," wouldn't you? Because of those two films in particular, or the films that they've done. And both such nice guys, so humble and laid back, and nothing like the characters they play, really.
So they filmed some location stuff in Edinburgh, and they filmed some in the Highlands. But the interiors, are they filming that in a sort of like a studio in Glasgow?
Yeah, they were all filmed in a cigarette factory.
Right, sort of makeshift, studio.
Yeah. They'd learnt that from Shallow Grave. You can get so much more buck for your bang if you don't do too much location shooting. And Saul Metzstein was given the task of finding a big enough unit to shoot that in. He found the Wills factory. They did the deal and got it for a steal, £7,000 or whatever it was, rented it, turned it into their studio. One of the stumbling blocks could have been that there wasn't a lot of height in there to create, film. A cinematographer wants to come in and pan in, whereas Danny treated that as a blessing, because when they went up to Edinburgh and tasked Saul with showing them Irvin Welsh's Trainspotting Edinburgh, a lot of the drug dens they went into, Danny said they were literally on the ground. They'd be chatting to these drug addicts on the ground because they're going to end up there anyhow, so they spend a lot of time on the ground. So he asked Brian Tufano to come up, how are we going to film from the ground? So the height restrictions in this Will's cigarette factory were null and void, because Danny wanted everything really shot low down, keep it low.
From floor level.
Yeah, exactly, floor level, which is just Danny's genius, really. It's just the ability to come up with these things and surround yourself by talented people like Cave and Ryan and people such like that.
There's a real vision there. I mean, you obviously, when you're talking about a director, it's something that a director is almost, it's the one quality they have to have. But that vision of, small psychos are the best, and we want everything from the floor level is exactly what they're there for. One of the things about this movie that I think goes beyond it being simply a movie is that at the time, 1996, when it came out, it was kind of ubiquitous because it wasn't just in the cinemas, it was on students' walls. We all had the posters. We had, the posters were outside were fly posted up everywhere. The posters actually looked like posters for what could be a nightclub or a gig or something. Then they were parodied, on and on by everybody. And there was also, I've already mentioned the haircuts and the fashion to some degree. And then there was a soundtrack that was a huge hit as well. So it's the film of the 90s, the British film of the 90s, which I think most achieved the nature of a phenomenon rather than just a film.
Yes, yeah, absolutely spot on. And that was key in particular to Andrew as a producer. He had spent a little bit of time in America, working in America, and when he came back, he realised that what the Americans do so well is they make the film, but even before they've made it, but certainly whilst they're making it, they're making that connection. How can we sell it? How can we find an audience? What's that key? Whereas a lot of what he found working in the British film industry, a lot of the time they make the film and got no idea how they're going to sell it, where they're going to go with it, and he didn't want that in particular for Trainspotting. What had happened on Shallow Grave was that the soundtrack had almost taken them by surprise, and they had to play catch up with Trainspotting. You wanted that soundtrack, and you wanted to sell the film from the get-go. And because the Shallow Grave had been so successful compared to the budget, they would get Polygram said, okay, we're going to spend a lot of money on this. And they spent nearly over £800,000 just promoting it, which for the size of the film and the time, it was huge. So
it's almost as much as the budget. I mean, it's
exactly.
$1 million shooting budget, and then 800,000. It's only 200,000 short of that budget.
Exactly, which is just remarkable. So they get the Lorenzo, the wonderful photographer, and Blam to design the poster. Lorenzo to start working out how they were going to shoot for the poster. They're coming up great ideas during it, as opposed to so many of the naff film posters you can think of that are thought about as an afterthought at the end. This poster was almost, this is what we're going to do before the film had shot. They wanted to make sure it was a band. That was key to them. So that each character, because the Urban's book was growing in popularity, but it wasn't a Lord of the Rings where a lot of people already knew of it. Who are these characters? So they wanted to create that on that poster. So the characters are already on the poster. People go, what are they? They're bloody cool. So you're intrigued and you're asking questions. So that was key. So that was being taken care of. And then the soundtrack. If somebody knows more about the music industry than Danny Boyle, and I've yet to meet them. He literally knows everything about music. He absolutely adores it, and it was huge.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous 2-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with Auto Quote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Fan of the rave music, dance music, and he'd found Dumb Bass, the Underworld album. I don't think that's the title actually. The Underworld album, and he said to Andrew and John, "This is how I perceive this soundtrack to the film. And if you've heard the album, it's pretty intense, and the whole film." No, that's just the vibe. That's the vibe. And then he built a collection of tapes up so that they could start editing the film. And they're on there. He's Lust for Life. You got some Bowie. You got some Lou Reed. You got some quite heavy weighted songs on there that are going to cost a fortune. And Andrew knowing this, started putting it together, and they worked out this step deal. So each artist would get paid a very minimal amount as a thank you, and as the soundtrack become more successful, they'd earn more money. Consequently, everybody earned money from that soundtrack because it just went through the roof. And I mean, how do you ask Iggy Pop this? Because obviously he's just one of the icons. But Irvin had alluded to it, how Lust for Life had given him a new lease of life. So I needed to sort of put that question to Iggy, and he said, "Did you?" But because I had it in first hand, because I had an older brother, and he was into Lou Reed and Bowie and Iggy Pop. So consequently, I was. But some of the guys that I knew had never heard of Iggy Pop. And then when Trainspotting came out, they were all over Iggy Pop. And bloody hell, you hated him. You know that territorial feel you get when you're a kid. How dare you come into music and literature and films that I like. And so he certainly, there was this rejuvenation of his career. Danny ended up reshooting the Lust for Life video, and the boys at MTV got hold of it, and they took it, and before you knew it, there's a whole new audience he was playing to. And I put that to Iggy. He said, no, I already thought I was huge. I was huge in my world, my mind. I was already a megastar. No. So he wouldn't have, so he wouldn't have it. But Irving said that's the greatest thing, really, that's to come from the film, and the success is that shared success. So his book was this tiny little book that had suddenly started growing. But with that, he then became friends with his hero, Iggy Pop, to this day. And then he made friends with Danny and Andrew and Ewan and John that has carried on. And anybody who's met Irving Welsh would allude to it as well. He's, without getting too schmaltzy, he's one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. One of the most giving guys you'll ever meet. Oh, yeah, I'm proud to say he's a friend, and he really is. I mean, without him, there wouldn't have been this book. Just to go right back to the beginning. I had written my first release book on the film performance, and I read that Irving Welsh and Dean Kavanagh were writing this play about two East End gangsters auditioning for the film performance. Bloody hell. So I got in touch with Irving via a friend. I said, Irv, this is what I'm up to. He said, well, shoot down to Edinburgh. So we shot down to Edinburgh to the festival, saw the play, met up, and we kept in touch, and he ended up contributing to the performance book and the legacy section. And then I said, look, come on, we should be looking at doing a book with a similar kind of feel for Trainspotting. He said, give me 5. And when some people say that, there's 5 years, 5 months, he literally was 5 minutes, came back and said, I'm going to send you an email, introduce you to Danny. I told him the project, I told him Nick Rogue, and he said, what's not to like? And so without that intro from Irving Welsh, there wouldn't have been a book, and that's the measure of the man. And so for him to then share that with the Danny Balls of this world, Iggy Pops, it's just wonderful to see that. Now, without being so territorial, I can look back and see that Lust for Life. Just couldn't imagine a song like not opening that film. Could you? Any other song?
I mean, I was a Stooges fan, and I remember being a bit sniffy about Iggy Pop as like a solo artist. It's like, the Stooges are amazing, but you know, after that he goes a bit metal, and he's
pop as well, wasn't it? Got a bit poppy.
Yeah, exactly, and that Wild Child thing, and and it really was. Trainspotting made me go, okay, maybe I should listen to these other albums as well.
Yeah, what a great album as well.
But I mean, also, I think that musical choice has something to do with the dates of the film compared to the dates of the book. That Irving Welsh is sort of writing something which is a little bit earlier than the sort of the 1996 basically contemporary setting. Yeah,
it's odd though, isn't it? Because as a what became really obvious to me whilst I was writing the book, and I dare I say I hadn't really given it an awful lot of thought beforehand, that there's no logic to the soundtrack. You've got the 70s Lou Reed and Iggy Pop, then you've got a bit of the 80s Heaven 17, and then you've got a bit of the 90s with Primal Scream and Blur, but you don't age in the film at all. The film doesn't age, but the soundtrack just takes you through it, and it's remarkable. An Underworld, Left Field. I mean, they shouldn't even been on the same soundtrack, but it works so well.
To me, that feels really realistic in terms of how bunches of young people create their own microclimates of culture. And so even with the sort of Sean Connery impersonations in the park, there's this sort of cultural referencing, which is, why are these guys in the 90s looking to Sean Connery and not looking to someone more recent? It's, well, that's just who they've grown up with.
And that's one of the reasons for perhaps why it resonates so well. because historically it's got such a big history around it
Yeah.
that you're learning things. And I'd say I was fortunate enough to have older brothers, but if you didn't and you were coming to it fresh, okay, who's Lou Reed? Who's Iggy Pop? Oh, Sean Connery in Bond. And you start investigating things, isn't it? It's how we all get into our music and our books. When one of your heroes references somebody from back you go, okay, who's this? Okay, Robert De Niro, Marlon Brando, Montgomery Clift, Jimmy Dean. Okay, I'm going to start looking at these guys. And that's what happens, isn't it? And I think Trainspotting is littered with those references that you can just go back and explore.
I wanted to ask as well, in terms of the legacy of the film, where do you see sort of Trainspotting fitting in to the sort of tradition of British cinema? Because you've done Performance, which I think is a really amazing British movie, and I think Rogue is one of the most exciting British directors, along with Michael Powell and Powell and Pressburger and a few others. To be absolutely honest, there seems to be that tradition, and I kind of think of Boyle in that sort of non-social realistic tradition. They're not making socially realistic films. They're not Ken Loach. They're not Mike Leigh. Although Mike Leigh sometimes isn't Mike Leigh either. So
what I picked up was that they really wanted their film to be seen by an audience, and that they were not going to sell out. They weren't going to make something they didn't want to make. I mean, look at it now. I mean, Shallow Grey, Trainspotting, even The Life Less Ordinary were very. They weren't following any trends. They would have. I mean, no one would have assumed that Trainspotting could be anything but a failure. Really, it could have easily been a dour film. And they wanted to make something totally different. And I think that's what one of Danny's heroes is Nick Rogue. So you alluded to him there, and that certainly got me in the door. And then Andrew MacDonald is Emmett Pressburger's grandson.
Right.
So these guys are steeped in it. And John Hodge, not in the film industry at all, he's a qualified doctor. And so all these lovely components all came together. And like a lot of these films, when you start investigating them and you start asking people for the references and whys and that, and so many of them with the performance to Adrian Ball, to Trainspotting, one thing that really perhaps binds them together is that the artists involved didn't really think about it too hard. It's us people looking back on it. Oh, that reference that and that reference that. No, not really. It wasn't that at all. We done it because we done it. There was no deep thinking about it. And I think that's a lot of it, that these guys are just fearless, really. One thing that certainly links Rogue and Boyle and some of the other fine filmmakers we've had. I'm loath to call it an industry. We've never really had an industry over here, have we? We've really these peaks and troughs all the time.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree with that. It's a really discontinuous thing. And I mean, there's a whole generation in the 1980s, and I think Boyle sort of is somewhere in between them. They just immediately sort of piss off to America at the first opportunity. I mean, I love Ridley Scott, but I don't think he's made a film set in the UK, except maybe Robin Hood, you could argue. But some people have argued that maybe Blade Runner is actually very similar to South Shields, where he grew up. There's a big oil refinery out there. So
yeah, it's a bit tenuous, that one, isn't it? Trying to make that link.
Yeah, exactly. But Alan Parker as well, Adrian Lyne, they all sort of, the minute they had the opportunity, they went to the States. Danny Boyle had two solid sort of British films before sort of making his and has come back. He's done more than one film back in Britain since.
Sounds a little bit too much of a love fest, this chap, but once again, he's such a lovely, giving, humble guy, and that comes through, and it's why people want to go back, keep working with him. He really is. Well, unless you're Johnny Rotten, who particularly doesn't like him at the moment, because of the Sex Pistols series he's just about to release. But yeah, he's such a great guy, and to me, he's been one of the huge joys writing this story.
Would you have liked to have seen his James Bond?
I was only saying that the other night. I've certainly been interested in what John Hodge writing the scripts, but having seen the film, I thoroughly enjoyed the new film. So who knows? These things happen for a reason, don't they?
Yeah, I heard the reason. I'm not sure how true this is because it came out of it, but I heard the reason was him and John Hodge didn't want to kill Bond at the end, and that was the idée fixe. That was the fixed idea that they had for the producers. They were like, we want Craig to finish his final film by dying.
No, I didn't ask Danny that. To this day, I've never asked him. I suppose I should, really.
Well, I'd be curious to find out if you do ask him.
Okay.
Even if it's not off the record, I'm fine. I'm fine just knowing personally without having to publicize it. Yeah, no, that would have been an interesting. That's going to be one of those, films that never were. I should get David Hughes on there. He wrote that.
I'm sure he'd have an answer. But yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? It was always an odd one because Danny's such an individual filmmaker. You can't imagine him making. I mean, initially they were going. He got the call to make Alien 3, I think it was, all three of them, and they were no, we don't really want to get caught up in that machine. And I think Danny's such an individual filmmaker. Even with something like Yesterday, which could have been too sweet and saccharine, he put his little bits to it and made it his own. Slumdog Millionaire was going to be straight to video, and it found a life and then took off. And he does put his spin on it. And to me, he's one of our greats. I mean, if he did nothing else other than Trainspotting and the Olympic Games, it's bookend my life. He certainly, to me, is one of the defining films in the 90s, Trainspotting, of any decade, really. And I mean, when I interviewed Noel Gallagher for the book, he put it to him, Trainspotting and Pulp Fiction were the defining films in the 90s. Well, if you're up against Pulp Fiction, that's not a bad place to be, is it? To be classed as the defining film of a generation. And as I said, to the top of it, it's to me, sitting there chatting to Ewan Bremner and Kevin McKidd and Robert Carlyle and Ewan McGregor, and you see their careers they've had. And to think that Ewan Bremner was going to turn the film down, because he couldn't play, he wasn't offered Renton, he played Renton on stage for 2 years. Just can't imagine anybody else playing Spud than Ewan Bremner. He just captured that heart and soul of a character. Just a wonderful piece of acting and casting. And you mentioned about hairstyles, but I think what was also really interesting to speak to Rachel Fleming, the costume designer, because her costumes get overlooked a little bit, and we're still wearing skinny jeans now because of Rachel Fleming. I spoke to Ewan about that, and he said that as he's getting older, he tries to put on a more relaxed jean on, but when he does, he feels like his dad, Ewan McGregor, because he just can't. That all comes from Rachel Fleming's wonderful costumes.
Yeah, and Diane's sequined dress.
Spoiler alert! But that morning after, and they wake up, and Renton's asking, "Are you two Diane's flatmates?" Yeah, and they look at each other, and she walks in her school uniform. I mean, I still remember the shock in the cinema, really, for everybody. It was a wonderful scene.
And I think that's the lovely thing about the movie as well, is you start off thinking this is again, going back to what I was saying earlier, maybe about it being a youth film. And then by the end of the film, kind of they've outstayed their welcome. They're not young people anymore. They're not young men anymore. The music has changed. Ecstasy is coming in. They don't understand it. It reminded me of that scene in Clockwork Orange at the final chapter of Anthony Burgess's book, where Alex is in a cafe and he's just gone back to his old ways, and a bunch of people start talking, and he doesn't. They're younger than him, and he doesn't understand them. It's like they're not talking the same lingo I'm talking. So it's just like, well, you've got older, mate. You're no longer the young terror that you thought you were.
That's right. And all of that took place in 90 minutes.
Yeah.
Talking a film that had so much in 90 minutes. It was like a great pop song, wasn't it? 3 minutes, in and out, done, dusted. You created a great pop song, and they did that with a 90-minute film.
Punk songs, even, like sort of 2 minutes, 30 seconds.
Danny's a huge fan of punk music, and he made a punk film. It really was interesting to hear that, and to hear that edit come together, and it's just a remarkable film. And it's to me, when I came up with the idea of writing the book on the film, I did give myself a few minutes to think, well, can I pull it off? But also, as well, was anybody else doing it? And no one else was doing it, which I found remarkable, that no one else had written a book about the making of one of the most iconic British films ever.
And also, I mean, before we move on totally, I would like to add to our sort of Danny Boyle love fest. I really like his genre pieces. I really love 28 Days Later and 28 Weeks Later. I know he didn't direct it, he was producing it, but there's some good bits in there as well. And Sunshine, I think, is a really underrated. I'm not sure if it's underrated. I don't know exactly where it stands. I'm not sure what the conversation is around, but I think it's brilliant. I think that's a super, very British feeling science fiction film.
Yeah. He has that knack, doesn't he? That to pull you into whatever he's doing, really. And I just find it phenomenal that 1, 2 of Shallow Grave and Trainspotting were literally their first films, and that's what was really not shocking, but I loved writing. But if you take it, John, you know, you've written, I've written, and John Hodge's first screenplay was Shallow Grave. It wasn't the 10th screenplay, and he had 6 others sitting in a drawer. It was his first screenplay. It got made into a film. His second screenplay got made into a film. His third screenplay got made into a film. I mean, that just never happens. And I put that to John as well, and he said, "I know. I just, when you think about it, it's just remarkable." Now, he said, "I can sit in development hell for ages. I'll have 3 or 4 other writers attached to a project I've been on. You know, I'm now in what the screenwriter's world is." But at the beginning of my career, it was okay. I've written the film. Oh, it's going to be made. But yeah, of course it's going to be made. I've just written it. No. That's not how it works.
That's not normal.
No, absolutely, just remarkable.
God, I must say, I'm beginning to hate him. Like, ludicrous good luck.
That lovely innocence of youth, not realizing what the parameters are, what the rules are. And if you don't know what the parameters and rules are, there's nothing. You're not fearing of breaking them, are you? And they're certainly not stifling you. You get out there and you do your thing, and you just see what happens. And I think that's, you know, looking out in my garden, I can see my children's trampoline, and you know, they get up and bounce up and down on that, and without a care in the world. And you get to a certain age, you're fearful jumping up and down on it, aren't you? And that's life, isn't it? The more you learn, the less chances you've got of taking risks, unless you're really foolhardy like us into writing and that. And you take a few risks, because if you don't, you know, where you're going to get. But when it's younger, it's a lot easier to take those risks, isn't it?
I went skiing for the first time in my life when I was like 36, and it's just like, no, that's totally the wrong time. You have to be fearless and bouncy and have rubber bones, and you know, so like the 8-year-olds are
whipping past
me as I tumble for the 9th time. It's like, okay, I've done enough of that. I'm not doing that again. So Trainspotting is out. It's making of Trainspotting is out. It's selling incredibly well by all accounts. What are your next projects?
Well, I'm at the moment writing another book, my third, with Robert De Niro's encouragement. This one on Taxi Driver. So I'm deep into that and unearthing some really great tales, and just putting sort of punching a few myths as well, which I'm learning, which is really good. And it's quite a hard one to piece together, actually, because the timeline is all over the show, because it took so long to get off the ground. And Michael Phillips, the producer, and Paul Schrader I've interviewed, and obviously Bob and Marty, they all had to have these things happen in their career before anybody would believe that they could make Taxi Driver. So just quickly, Paul Schrader had written Taxi Driver in a very dark moment in his life, and then wrote a screenplay called Yakuza. That was sold for a then astronomical sum of $325,000. And now he's a top-rated screenwriter. Michael Phillips, new to the film industry within weeks, are deciding to hang their shingle out in Los Angeles. This young screenwriter had come in and pitched this movie, verbal pitch, and they said, "That sounds good. What else have you written?" He said, "Well, I've written this screenplay whilst I'm at college." That got made. The pitched film was The Sting. That won Best Film. So suddenly now they've got a really high-profile screenwriter. They've got an Oscar-winning producer. Then Bob won the Oscar for Godfather 2. Marty didn't have Mean Streets out at that stage, so they wouldn't give him the film. Mean Streets come out, and they were, "Oh, hang on a minute. Okay, we're going to give you the film now, and you've got to have Johnny Boy as Travis." Marty, the studios wouldn't really believe in him as a director until Ellen Bernstein. He directed Ellen Bernstein to Best Actress Oscar. So suddenly you had all these components, but even then they were only given just over, I think it was $900,000, and it rose. The budget rose, much grief from the studio, to 1.3. I mean, $1.3 million for Taxi Driver. I mean, just forget it already. I mean, there's a couple of days catering on the movie.
Yeah, and it's shooting in New York. It's not like it's one of those low budget films where you're in a single location or something like that. You're on the streets of New York.
Yeah, and it becomes a character. It is a character that New York, you know, is on its knees financially. So it's been really interesting to investigate this film. Calls out to Sybil Shepherd and Jodie Foster, so we're hopefully chatting soon, and I'm really looking forward to piecing that one together. I mean, really, you know, it's not a chore. It's been an absolute joy to once you get the timeline right and you can piece the narrative together. It has been, and I've been unearthing some really some of the runners, some of the young actors at the time. I've found them, and I love finding these people. To me, each one of my books is peppered by a young runner or somebody, because these guys have never had an opportunity to tell their story, and it's so wonderful to get them. Bloody hell, you can write a book like this without Bob on board. But likewise, I do love finding some of the unsung heroes, shall we say?
Yeah, who have different stories as well, different perspectives.
Yeah, exactly. And come on, Taxi Driver. It's just one of the greatest films ever made. And
have you got Albert Brooks?
Certainly written away. I haven't had any feedback from Albert yet, but I found a couple of interviews. So I'm desperate to get him, and I'm a little bit more relaxed about it now, finding the components, because building the story, and you hope that you're going to get these people on board. So I'm hoping that Albert will come on board. I mean, I don't know Albert Brooks at all, but I'm hoping that he will. My book's always a celebration. I'm not asking to any of the salacious sort of gossip unless it drives the narrative along. I'm not interested. So hopefully he'll see the benefit of coming on board, because it's certainly going to be another beautiful book. And then I've got some fingers in some other pies that I'm starting moving forward. I can't really say just yet.
Exciting times. Listen, Jay, you've already been on once, and so you've given us some recommended books, but I'm going to ask you for another recommended book because why not? Why wouldn't I? And you've got a room full. You can't see this obviously on the podcast, but behind Jay there are shelves and shelves and shelves of film books.
Look, just view around that walls as well. Look at the mess there. Thousands of them. Well, we spoke at the top of this, actually, so I'll go with Patrick
McGillian.
Yeah, his backstory series are absolutely top notch. They are set into separate decades, and they centre on screenwriters of the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and absolutely amazing. They're really amazing books. They're just feats. They're just some of the greatest stories I've ever heard and read, and it's a masterful collection.
And he interviewed like all these screenwriters, and many of these screenwriters, nobody had interviewed before. People like Julius Epstein, who's one of the writers on Casablanca, wrote loads of, and he's going there and he's just getting so much wisdom and knowledge out of these guys.
Yes, seriously, I can't recommend them enough. And as you say, they really are, the names that if you're involved in any form of film history, you'd recognise, but chances are you probably never read an interview with them. But Patrick unearthed them, and he really is one of the greats. And I haven't listened to your episode with him yet, but I'll certainly be listening to it either tonight or tomorrow, because he's one of the greats in the film history historians. He really is one of the great writers. So their backstory series, get on the eBay and grab yourself some copies of those. They are phenomenal.
Brilliant, great recommendation, and fantastic. I'll also put a link to Trainspotting, the making of, and you have Raging Bull Performance and the Deer Hunters. Are they all still available?
Yes, there was copies yet. I don't think Trainspotting will be around for too long. We had a little bit of a mess up with a delivery of the sort of second batch, if you like, and we didn't receive them till Christmas Eve, so they went on sale again today. I'd delight to say the orders have been flooding in. They're not cheap. I know they're not cheap, but they take such a lot of work and effort, and they're huge tomes. So I think we certainly haven't had any complaints thus far from anybody who's bought copies.
I'm very pleased for you. It's definitely something that you deserve, and something that the films deserve as well.
Thank you. And
wonderful.
Just before we sign off as well, a little bit of blowing some smoke your way. This series and what you've achieved, John, has been absolutely superb. I remember from the get-go, you and I spoke on Twitter, and you said, this is what I'm going to be doing. Anybody who's interested? Yeah. And so I just put my hat as a yes, and then no thought of you interviewing me about my books. I don't know why, but because I wanted to learn about the authors I knew you were going to be chatting to. So hats off to you, pal, for what you've achieved, because honestly, this series absolutely superb. And I noticed that you were in one of the magazines, was it Time Out New York or something like that, who said you were one of the great podcasts to listen to in 2022, and here.
Cheers, mate. I really appreciate it. And come back and talk about your next book, Taxi Driver.
Sure thing, buddy. Keep
nice.
well.
Take care. So that was Jay and myself talking about Trainspotting principally, although he also gave a little bit of a taster of his next book, on Taxi Driver. Jay's books are amazing and come highly recommended. I'd also like to repeat his recommended book, which was Patrick McGilligan's Backstory series of books. There are 5 books altogether, include all interviews with screenwriters, and so you'll already have heard, I hope, the episode where I talked to Patrick. But yeah, they are well worth going back to and having a look at. They're really, really great series of interviews. So all that's left for me to do is to thank Elliot Atkins for the music, thank Ali Harwood for the artwork, and until next week, take care.
Cue the fireplace and your favorite fall movie. There's nothing better than a cozy evening at home with a glass of First Leaf wine. First Leaf is a personalized wine club that delivers right to your door. Sounds magical, right? They get to know your favorite tasting notes, which varietals you enjoy, and whether you prefer sweet or dry wines. So in every shipment, you get bottles tailored to your unique palate. Go to tryfirstleaf.com/fall to get your first 6 wines for just $44.95 with free shipping.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with Auto Quote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.